The tropical sun hammered down on Clark Air Base like a relentless forge, turning the cracked concrete runway into a shimmering haze that distorted the horizon. It was January 31st, 1945, and the air carried the sharp tang of scorched rubber from recent landings, mingled with the damp rot of nearby jungle, and the faint, acrid residue of gunpowder that never quite left the place. Luzon had been retaken, but the scars of occupation lingered everywhere, in the pockmarked earth, in the twisted wrecks of aircraft pushed to the edges of the field, in the eyes of men who had fought through months of mud and fire. Major Frank T. McCoy moved slowly toward the anomaly parked at the far end of the apron. His boots crunched on loose gravel, each step deliberate, as if the ground itself might give way under the weight of what he was about to confront. Sweat traced slow paths down his temples beneath the brim of his cap, but he barely noticed. His team, 3 other technical intelligence officers, their shirts darkened with perspiration, followed in silence, notebooks already open, camera slung around necks like talismans. The aircraft before them was no mangled remnant dragged from a crash site. It sat almost serenely on its tricycle gear, tail number 76312 stark against the faded green camouflage. A Mitsubishi G4M, the Betty, intact. From a distance, the machine possessed a strange, almost elegant menace. The long, cylindrical fuselage swelling outward like an overfed cigar, the wings stretching wide in a graceful arc that belied the violence it had been built to deliver. Nearly 20 meters nose to tail, 25 tip to tip, powered by 2 14-cylinder radials that even silent seemed to hum with latent power. No gaping holes from cannon fire, no blackened streaks from flames that had consumed so many of its brothers. Its crew had simply walked away during the American advance, abandoning it as if sensing the futility of further flight. McCoy climbed the ladder first, the metal hot under his palms. The interior smelled of stale oil, old sweat, and something metallic, perhaps the ghost of cordite from defensive guns long since emptied. He moved aft along the narrow corridor, past the bombardier station, the radio operator's nook, the sparse bunks where 7 men had once shared the cramped space on missions that stretched across endless ocean. His flashlight beam played over the wing roots, and he knelt to open the inspection panels. The others crowded in behind him, their breathing audible in the confined air. What lay inside stole the breath from the compartment. 8 vast fuel tanks nestled within the wing structure, integral to the very bones of the aircraft, holding thousands of liters of high-octane aviation gasoline. The liquid sloshed faintly with the slight rocking of the fuselage, a soft, ominous sound like distant surf. But there was no protection. No layered rubber compounds that would swell and seal around punctures. No armor plating to deflect fragments or bullets. No foam fillers, no inert gas systems, no reliable extinguishers beyond rudimentary hand pumps that would have been useless against spreading fire. Just thin aluminum skin, perhaps 2 millimeters at its thickest, separating volatile fuel from the slightest spark or tracer round. McCoy's hand hovered over one tank's surface, feeling the cool metal give slightly under pressure. He imagined the moment of impact, a .50 caliber round puncturing through at an angle, fuel misting outward in a fine spray, igniting in a heartbeat. The flames would roar forward along the wing, devouring the structure, trapping men in the cockpit as the aircraft became a comet streaking across the sky. He had examined dozens of downed Japanese machines across the Pacific, twisted fuselages in New Guinea mud, blackened hulks on Guadalcanal ridges, but nothing prepared him for this deliberate vulnerability. It was not oversight or shortage of materials. This was choice, ruthless, calculated choice. One of the pilots in the team, a young lieutenant who had flown P-38s against these very bombers, leaned in closer. His voice was low, almost reverent. They built a death trap on purpose. The words hung in the humid air. McCoy nodded slowly. In that moment, the Betty revealed its soul, an engineering marvel engineered for reach, for the vast emptiness of the Pacific where carriers could not follow, where land bases were scattered like distant islands. But reach demanded sacrifice. Every kilogram counted. Self-sealing tanks would have added hundreds of pounds, armor more still, reducing range by a quarter, perhaps more. The Imperial Japanese Navy had weighed the scales and decided survival was secondary to striking distance. Outside, the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the field. McCoy stepped down from the ladder, his mind already turning over the implications.
This single aircraft, abandoned in haste, would reshape Allied understanding of Japanese doctrine. It explained the early terror, the lightning raids from Formosa to the Philippines, the sinking of Prince of Wales and Repulse off Malaya, the deep penetrations that had left Allied commanders reeling. It also explained the later pyres, formations vanishing in fireballs, crews burning in cockpits over shark-infested seas, the grim nicknames whispered in ready rooms: Flying Lighter, One-Shot Zippo, Flying Coffin. He looked back at the Betty one last time. The plane sat motionless, its menace quiet now, almost mournful. In the fading light, it seemed less a weapon of war and more a monument to a philosophy that had gambled everything on distance and speed, paying in blood when the gamble failed. The war in the Pacific had turned, and this captured machine was proof of why. The engineers began their detailed work, photographs, measurements, notes. But McCoy lingered a moment longer, feeling the weight of what had been revealed. Thousands of Japanese airmen had climbed into machines like this, knowing the odds, flying anyway. The range had been extraordinary, the cost, unthinkable.
In the dim light of Mitsubishi's Nagoya design offices, late 1937 carried the low hum of draftsmen's pencils scratching across paper and the occasional clink of teacups set down too hard. Kido Honjo sat at his desk, surrounded by blueprints that seemed to stretch forever, the weight of the Imperial Japanese Navy's requirements pressing against his shoulders like humid air before a storm. The Pacific was no ordinary theater. It was a vast, unforgiving expanse where islands floated like specks in an endless sea, separated by distances that mocked conventional aircraft. Carriers could not reach every corner. The Navy demanded a land-based bomber that could strike from afar, over 3,700 kilometers with payload, cruising at altitudes beyond most anti-aircraft reach, delivering torpedoes heavy enough to cripple warships, all while maintaining speed that offered some hope of evasion. Honjo had trained in Germany, at Junkers, absorbing the disciplined precision of European engineering, yet he understood the constraints unique to Japan: limited resources, vast geography, an impending war that would span oceans rather than continents. The older G4M Nell had served well, but fell short. Its range barely touched the Navy's vision. To meet the new specifications, top speed above 400 kilometers per hour, bomb load of 800 kilograms or a torpedo, service ceiling high enough to avoid pursuit, the aircraft had to be stripped to its essence. Every component was weighed, debated, recalculated. Fuel became the tyrant. Each liter added 0.8 kilograms, and thousands were needed to cross those empty stretches. Protection systems, rubber self-sealing liners, armor plates around crustaceans and engines, redundant fire suppression, carried penalties measured in hundreds of kilograms. Adding them would shrink range by a quarter or more, rendering the bomber useless for the very missions it was conceived to perform. The decision crystallized in quiet meetings, where voices remained low, the air thick with cigarette smoke and unspoken dread. Honjo's team mapped the wing structure, integrating fuel tanks directly into the spars and ribs to maximize volume without added bulk. 8 cells, 4 per wing, nestled in the thickest sections where structural strength was greatest, but also where enemy fire would most likely strike. The skin remained thin aluminum, flexible yet fragile, offering no resistance to penetration. Test pilots, returning from prototype flights over the Sea of Japan, spoke in measured tones of the machine's grace in the air, its ability to glide long distances on reduced power, but they also whispered warnings: a stray round, a tracer in the wrong place, and the aircraft would become a torch. Honjo listened, nodded, recorded the data. The Navy's directive was clear: range first. Survival was a secondary consideration, to be addressed only if performance allowed. The first prototype lifted off on October 23, 1939, engines roaring as it climbed into overcast skies. It handled with surprising lightness, the controls responsive, the range projections holding true in measured flights. Production followed swiftly, the Type 1 land attack bomber entering squadron service by mid-1941. Crews took to it with a mixture of awe and quiet apprehension. The fuselage's cylindrical shape earned it the nickname hamaki, the flying cigar, among Japanese airmen, a term that carried both affection and foreboding. In hangars across Formosa and the home islands, men loaded torpedoes, checked navigation charts spanning thousands of kilometers, and climbed aboard knowing the aircraft could take them farther than any before it. December 1941 brought validation in fire and smoke. On the 8th, as Pearl Harbor's echoes still reverberated, 82 G4Ms lifted from Formosa bases, engines straining against tropical heat. They arrived over Clark Field at high altitude, bombs cascading in precise patterns that cratered runways and ignited fuel dumps.
Zeros followed low, machine guns stitching across parked B-17s and P-40s. In 45 minutes, American air power in the Philippines lay in ruins, the Bettys departing untouched, their range rendering interception impossible. 2 days later, off Malaya, the same aircraft executed low-level torpedo runs against Prince of Wales and Repulse. Waves skimmed the sea, torpedoes released at wave-top height, explosions ripping hulls open. Both capital ships rolled and sank within hours, the first time land-based bombers alone had claimed such prizes at sea. The world watched in stunned silence. Naval doctrine shifted overnight. Through the first months of 1942, the Betty ranged unchecked. Raids on Darwin pierced deep into Australia, strikes hammered New Guinea positions, support missions reached from Rabaul across the Solomons. Pilots spoke of the exhilaration, the long, steady cruise over featureless ocean, the satisfaction of arriving where no enemy expected, delivering payloads that altered battles. In quiet moments between missions, some reflected on the thin metal surrounding them, the sloshing fuel beneath their feet, but discipline held. The aircraft was delivering what the Empire needed most, reach. For a fleeting season, the gamble appeared to succeed.
By mid-1942, the Pacific skies had grown crowded with new threats. American carriers returned. Fighter squadrons swelled with Wildcats giving way to Hellcats and Corsairs. Radar extended detection ranges, and pilots honed tactics against the lumbering bombers. The Betty's size and light defensive armament, scattered 7.7mm machine guns and a single tail cannon, offered little deterrence. But the true vulnerability lay deeper. Those integral wing tanks, unprotected, turned minor damage into catastrophe. A burst of .50 caliber fire into the wing root released fuel in a mist that ignited instantly, flames racing along spars, consuming the aircraft in seconds. Crews had no time for ordered bailout. Cockpits filled with heat and smoke, controls seized as structure melted. Many perished strapped in, others leaped into empty sea, far from rescue. Combat reports accumulated like grim tallies. On August 8, 1942, 23 torpedo-laden Bettys departed Rabaul for Guadalcanal targets. American interceptors met them over Savo Island. 18 fell in flames. More than 120 airmen lost in a single afternoon, one of the heaviest blows to Japanese naval aviation. The pattern repeated relentlessly. Formations approached, fighters pounced, pyres dotted the horizon. Allied pilots coined names that spread through ready rooms: Flying Lighter, One-Shot Zippo, Flying Coffin, each evoking the same image, a cigar-shaped bomber blooming into fire from the slightest touch. Japanese crews, in private moments, acknowledged the truth. Without escort, missions became lotteries of survival. Guadalcanal bled the squadrons dry. Over months, more than 100 Bettys vanished, crews numbering in the hundreds consumed by flames or ocean. Night operations offered temporary respite, but daylight strikes remained suicidal. Then came April 18, 1943. Codebreakers pinpointed Admiral Yamamoto's inspection flight, a Betty escorted by Zeros. 16 P-38 Lightnings launched from Guadalcanal, flying low over 400 miles of ocean on dead reckoning navigation. They arrived precisely, bullets striking wing tanks. Yamamoto's aircraft erupted, crashing into Bougainville jungle. The Empire lost its strategic architect, morale fractured under the loss. By 1945, desperation deepened. Bettys carried Ohka rocket bombs, piloted suicide weapons, in missions where survival was never expected. Formations lumbered toward Okinawa, dragged from external loads robbing maneuverability. Hellcats intercepted early, entire groups disintegrated before release, crews and Ohka pilots perishing in fireballs. Hundreds died without reaching targets. Engineers attempted remedies too late. From March 1943, rubber sheets were added beneath tanks, minimal weight, limited leakage control, but no true sealing. Speed and range suffered slightly, fires from cannon shells persisted. The G4M3, introduced October 1944, finally incorporated self-sealing tanks and crew armor, fuel capacity reduced, range curtailed by over 2,000 kilometers. Only 60 to 90 were built, production faltered under Allied bombing and resource shortages. The end came in quiet symbolism. August 19, 1945, 4 days after surrender announcement, 2 white-painted Bettys, green crosses stark on fuselages, carried Japanese delegations from Atsugi to Ishima. American P-38s escorted them, protective yet watchful. The aircraft that had opened the Pacific Air War with devastation now required enemy fighters for safe passage to peace talks. Crews wore dress uniforms, carried no weapons. The machines, once symbols of reach, became vessels of capitulation. The Betty's legacy settled like ash. Over 2,400 built, few survived. Thousands of airmen perished, many in flames the design made inevitable. American engineers, dissecting Tail 76312 at Clark Field, saw not failure, but deliberate philosophy. Range prioritized over life. Assumptions of quick victory and limited opposition proved false.
Allied bombers accepted weight penalties for protection, self-sealing tanks, armor, because trained crews were irreplaceable. Japan calculated differently, and the arithmetic ended in pyres across the Pacific. The captured machines stood as quiet testimony. Brilliance in engineering, tragedy in execution. Performance had been achieved, humanity had been spent. As the last echoes of the Pacific War fade into history, the Mitsubishi G4M Betty stands as a quiet, haunting reminder. Brilliance in design can come at the heaviest price. Thousands of young men climbed into those unprotected wings, flew impossible distances, and paid with their lives for a reach that ultimately could not outrun reality. When Major McCoy and his team opened those fuel tanks at Clark Field, they didn't just uncover aluminum and gasoline. They uncovered a nation's desperate calculation and its tragic cost. If this story moved you, if it made you pause and think about the human side of those machines in the sky, then please show some love right now. Hit that like button if you felt the weight of those sacrifices. Drop a comment below. Do you think the range was worth the terrible price Japan paid, or was it a fatal mistake from the start? Your thoughts mean a lot. Reading them keeps this channel alive and growing. And if you want more deep, untold stories from World War II, forgotten battles, hidden decisions, the real human cost behind the headlines, then subscribe to WW2 Impact today and turn on the notification bell. We're building a community here for people who want to go beyond the surface, and your support makes every new video possible. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for watching all the way through. You're not just a viewer, you're part of the WW2 Impact family now. Share this video with someone who loves history as much as you do. Let's keep these stories alive together. Until the next deep dive, stay curious, stay respectful of the past, and I'll see you soon. Take care.